Get off this plane, now!
You're making a serious mistake.
You will need to step off the aircraft now, ma'am. The words were not an accident. They were not nerves or a misread situation or a tired man having a bad morning. They were delivered the way a verdict is delivered. Calm, certain, practiced. The way someone speaks when they have said the same thing to the same kind of face many times before, and never once Dean Caller stood in the throat of jet preg. Officer by Dean Caller stood the narrow throat of B. One hand resting on the door frame of Summit Air, Flight 512. His radio clipped high on his chest, his jaw set with the quiet confidence of a man who had already decided how this would end. He was not whispering. He was not leaning in to spare her the embarrassment. He said it loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear, loud enough for the flight attendant near the galley to straighten her spine. Loud enough for a businessman in seat 3C to lower his newspaper a single inch and pretend he was not paying attention. Collar looked at the woman standing in front of him, at the dark travel coat and plain leather flats, the black carry-on with worn wheels, the face he had read in less than a second, and filed under a category he trusted more than any boarding pass. And he decided right there in the mouth of the aircraft that she did not belong in the seat she was standing beside. Her name was Diana Carter. She's 46 years old. She had a first-class ticket in her hand. Seat 2A, Chicago to Geneva, paid in full 3 weeks earlier. And she said nothing at first. She only looked at him, not with fear, not with anger, but with the still and measuring calm of someone who had learned long ago that the loudest thing in any room is a person who refuses to panic. What Officer Dean Kohler did not know, what none of them knew, not the gate agent who had started it, not the supervisor who would protect it, not the flight attendant who would nod along, was that in just under 4 hours, this quiet woman he was preparing to walk off the plane would end a $600 million deal that his airline had been chasing for over a year. And he would be the reason it died. But that comes later. First, you need to understand how a woman with a valid ticket, a confirmed seat, and every right to be exactly where she stood ended up being escorted off an aircraft in front of a full cabin. And why not one of the people who could have stopped it opened their mouth until it was almost too late? Let me rewind 3 hours and 30 minutes. Back to the moment Diana Carter first walked up to the gate, dressed like an ordinary traveler, carrying a secret none of them bothered to imagine. Chicago O'Hare moved like a living thing that morning, restless, loud, indifferent to the weight of individual moments. Announcements rolled across the terminal in 3 languages. Rolling suitcases clicked over polished floors in 100 different rhythms. Somewhere, a child was crying, and somewhere else a coffee machine hissed, and a man in a rush apologized to Knowlton as he shouldered past a family clustered around a departures board. Diana Ellison Carter walked through all of it without hurrying. She had learned over many years and in many airports that the moment you rush, you hand other people permission to treat you like you are behind. So she moved at her own pace, one hand on the handle of her carry-on, the other holding her phone, her boarding pass already open on the screen. Seat 2A, first class, Flight 512 to Geneva, connecting to a meeting that a great many people in expensive offices were already waiting for, though not a single one of them knew she would be traveling this way. No assistant, no entourage, no designer luggage announcing her arrival before she made it through the door. She reached gate cage 12 with 40 minutes to spare and stepped up to the priority counter where a young man in a crisp Summit Air uniform was frowning at a monitor. His name tag read Kyle Weston. He was maybe 30, clean cut, with the easy posture of someone accustomed to being the one who said yes or no to other people. He glanced up as she approached, and something small happened in his face. A flicker, quick and almost invisible, the kind of thing you could talk yourself out of having seen. His eyes moved over her coat, her flats, the scuffed corner of her carry settled somewhere just past her shoulder. Economy check-in is down to your left, ma'am. he said. This is the priority line. Diana turned her phone toward him, screen out. B. I'm in the priority line, she said. Her voice was even, not soft, not sharp, just level. Seat 2A, first class. Kyle did not look at the screen. Not really. He looked at her face again, then let his gaze drop back to his own monitor as if the answer were already settled there. We are doing a full verification on this flight this morning, he said. International departure. It will take a few minutes. Behind Diana, a man cleared his throat with the polite impatience of someone used to lines moving for him. He wore a tan blazer, a crisp open collar, and the kind of watch that did not need to be expensive to command attention. His name, though no one had asked, was Bradley Harmon. He shifted his weight and let out a short put-upon exhale. Kyle Weston's whole manner changed. "Good morning, sir," he said, and there was warmth in it now, an eagerness that had been entirely absent a moment before. "Heading to Geneva with us today?" "I am." Bradley set his phone on the counter without even opening the boarding pass. Kyle scanned it in a single fluid motion, green, light, done, and slid it back. "You are all set, Mr. Harmon. Boarding is about 30 minutes out. The lounge is just up the escalator on your right. Fresh spread this morning. Appreciate it, B." Bradley flashed a smile that took Diana in for half a second and dismissed her in the same breath. He strolled toward the escalator without a backward glance. Diana watched the whole thing happen in silence. No verification for him, no full check, no frown, no wait, no elaborate international departure procedure. Just a scan, a smile, and a recommendation about the lounge spread. She turned back to Kyle and set her phone flat on the counter. Boarding pass still open. "Scan mine," she said. He did not reach for it. "I told you, ma'am. We have a hold on this. You just scanned his." Kyle's mouth tightened for a moment, and Diana saw the exact shape of what was happening. It was not that he doubted the ticket was real. It was that he had decided somewhere in the first 2 seconds that a woman who looked like her, dressed like her, traveling alone like her, could not possibly be where her ticket said she was. And now that the screen was about to prove him wrong, he needed the delay to protect the version of the world he had already committed to. She had seen this before, cleaner versions of it, uglier versions of it, in hotel lobbies where the desk clerk asked if she had the right property, in boardrooms where people assumed she was there to take notes, in private clubs where her membership dues had been cashed months before her presence was believed. The words changed. The look never did. "And ma'am," Kyle said, softer now, the way people go soft when they want you to accept something without making them name it. Sometimes the app pulls up an old confirmation. It does not always mean the seat is still active. I would hate for you to board and find out there is an issue. There is no issue, Diana said. Her thumb moved once across the screen, opening the full confirmation. Her name, her passport number, the fare class, the payment record, the seat assignment. Everything legal, everything current. She turned the phone so it faced him directly. Seat 2A, paid 3 weeks ago. "Do you see anything on that screen that looks like an old confirmation to you?" He looked at it. He had to now. His eyes moved across the details, and Diana watched the certainty leak out of his face and get replaced by something more careful, but not an apology. Never that. Instead, he reached for the desk phone. "I'm just going to have a colleague confirm the manifest," he said, not meeting her eyes. Standard for Priority International. Off to the side, a second agent had been watching. A young woman in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled into a low knot and a name tag that read Alicia Torres. She had the alert, slightly anxious focus of someone still new enough to believe that the rules meant what they said. Her eyes moved from Diana's phone to Kyle's face and back. Something troubled passed across her expression. She took half a step forward as if to say something. Kyle caught it. "Alicia, can you pull the standby list for the back cabin?" he said without looking at her. It was not a question. Alicia hesitated, then turned to her own screen, but her eyes came back to Diana twice more while she typed, and each time they stayed a beat longer than they should have. Diana stood at the counter, unmoving, and let the terminal flow around her. A Tice, Harris. She did not give them the rushed passenger, the flustered woman, the person who would rather accept a lie than fight through the procedure of proving they take TT and they to E. That stillness itself was a kind of power, that the most dangerous thing you could do to a system built on small humiliations was refuse to behave like you were humiliated. Kyle set the phone down. I am going to need a second form of identification before I can process priority boarding, he said. Diana did not raise her voice. A passport is not sufficient for a domestic to international first-class passenger, but a phone tap was sufficient for the gentleman in the blazer. That is different. Tell me how, Diana said. He could not, and they both knew it. So he did what people do when they have no answer and no intention of looking for one. He retreated into the machinery. I do not set the policy, he said. I just follow it. Then show me the policy, Diana said. The one that requires a second form of identification from me and nothing at all from him. Kyle's jaw worked. For a moment, the only sound at the counter was the hum of his monitor and the distant announcement of a Denver departure. Alicia Torres had stopped typing. And then Kyle Weston did the thing that would matter more than he could have imagined 3 hours later, when a strip of paper fell out of a printed E and no one in the terminal could look away. He tapped a few keys, glanced at Diana's face one final time, and said, I am flagging this reservation for additional review. In the meantime, you will want to proceed through security. We will sort the seat once you are airside. He said it like a favor. He said it like he was helping her. What he did not say, what he could not have known she already suspected, was that additional review was not a neutral act. It was a switch being flipped, a door quietly closing, dressed up to look like a door being held open. And Diana Carter, who had built an entire company by learning to read exactly these small movements, in exactly these kinds of men, picked up her phone, slid it into her coat pocket, and said nothing at all. She simply turned, lifted the handle of her carry-on, and walked toward the security checkpoint with her shoulders square and her chin level, because she had learned a long time ago that the worst thing you could do in a moment like this was let them see you hurry. The priority security lane at O'Hare was supposed to be the easy one, shorter, staffed by officers who moved passengers through with the brisk efficiency of people who understood that certain travelers did not like to wait. Diana joined the short line, set her carry-on the belt, and placed her briefcase beside it. She unclipped her watch and dropped it into the small gray tray. She stepped out of her shoes. She did all of this at the same unhurried pace she did everything else that morning, and the line moved forward, and the belt hummed, and the officer at the podium scanned boarding passes one after another with a small practiced motion. Green nod through, green light nod through, the machine chirping its small approval with each passenger, the morning restoring itself to its normal rhythm, complicated and efficient. Then Diana handed over her phone. The officer at the podium was a broad-shouldered man in his mid-30s with a shaved head and a name tag that red color. He held the scan over her screen, and the light flashed green. He looked at the green light. Then he looked at her. Ma'am, he said, you have been randomly selected for enhanced screening. Diana looked at the scanner, still glowing green in his hand. I have TSA pre-check, she said. Global entry as well. System selection. Collar's voice was flat and unbothered. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. She had heard that phrase before, in a dozen forms, in a dozen different uniforms, delivered by a dozen different people who needed to believe the thing they were doing was not the thing they were doing. It was always the phrase people reached for when they wanted someone to swallow humiliation without making anyone say its actual name out loud. And it was always, without exception, deeply personal. The whole point of it was that it was personal. What made it bearable for the people saying it was the performance of pretending it wasn't. Diana stepped where Collar pointed, into the longer, slower line off to the side. and she began to watch what happened next with the quiet attention of a woman who knew how to collect evidence without appearing to collect anything at all. A man in a college sweatshirt stepped up to the same officer. Green light. Nod, throw. A woman in a cream-colored coat laughing at something on her phone. Green throw. An older couple with matching rolling bags. A teenager with headphones around his neck. A mother with a toddler balanced on her hip. Green. Green. Through. 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 Not one of them was randomly selected. Diana remained in the enhanced screening line behind a rope while the ordinary morning of ordinary travelers flowed past her like water around a stone. She did not resent the people going through. They were not the problem. The problem was the hand that had moved her here and then called the move random, as if randomness had preferences, as if a coin flip somehow kept landing the same way every time it saw her face. At the far end of the enhanced line, a second officer waited at an inspection table. His name tag read Simmons. He was older than Collar, thinner, with small, tired eyes and a manner that suggested he had been doing this long enough that the work had hollowed something out of him. He gestured for her carry-on, then for her briefcase, and he's unzipped the briefcase without asking. The way you open something you have already decided belongs to you. He pulled out her tablet, set it aside. Her laptop, set it aside, a charging cable, a folded pair of reading glasses, a leather notebook, and then his fingers stopped. At the bottom of the briefcase, he had found a sealed folder, thick, stamped across the front in heavy type with the words Meridian Global Confidential Review. His finger stopped on it. He turned it over, read the label, and glanced up at her with new interest. What is this? Private documents, Diana said. Her voice had dropped just slightly, the way a voice drops when the thing being touched is something that acts folder. Simmons did not put it down. Please did not put it down. He worked one corner of the seal loose with his thumb, the flap beginning to lift. And Diana could already see the corner of a printed report inside and the edge of a logo she had approved herself 18 months ago in a boardroom in Atlanta. That folder contains confidential financial material, she said, and now each word landed separately, deliberate, precise. It should not be opened without cause. You do not have cause. You a lawyer? No. Then let us do our job. Across the table, Dean Collar had wandered over to watch. He said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence was its own kind of pressure. A second man standing with folded arms, while the first one pried into a stranger's private papers, the two of them making a small wall of authority out of nothing but their uniforms and their certainty that this was permitted. And a third officer, a woman younger, with a long face and watchful eyes, and a name tag that read Brent, stood a few feet off and did nothing, not opening the folder, not stopping it either. Just watching with an expression Diana recognized, the discomfort of a person who knows something is wrong and has not yet found the courage to say so. Her silence was not cruelty. It was something else. And sometimes that something else does the work of cruelty just as well. Diana looked at Simmons. She looked at the half-open folder, and she did something that surprised him. She softened her voice. I understand you have a job to do, she said. I respect that. I am not asking you to skip a step. I am asking you to respect my property the way you would respect anyone else's. Close the folder, run it through the machine sealed if you need to, but do not read what you have no reason to read. For a moment, the noise of the checkpoint seemed to pull back. The bins clattering, the belt running, the endless shuffle of shoes into gray plastic trays. Simmons held her gaze. Something in her calm reached him. Or maybe it was simply that she had not given him the raised voice he had been preparing for, the anger that would have let him feel justified in every choice he had made, Gunsti, template. He closed the folder, not gently, and pushed it back across the table toward her on top of the scattered pile of her belongings. You are clear, he said. No apology, Diana began to gather her things. She did it slowly, deliberately, the way a person restores order to a room a stranger has ransacked. Tablet back into its sleeve, cable coiled and tucked, The sealed folder lifted and set in place, its loosened edge pressed flat with two fingers, E, as if she could smooth the entire morning back into order along with it. Her hands were steady. Her chest was not with fear, with memory. She thought of her father. Marcus Carter had driven a delivery route for 30 years across the same city, the same neighborhoods, in all kinds of weather. And every single morning of those 31 years, before he backed that truck out of the lot, he wiped down the dashboard. Even when no one would ever see it, even when it would just get dusty again by afternoon. When Diana was small, she asked him why, and he looked at her with those steady eyes and said, because the way you treat the space you occupy says more about you than the space does, baby. A man who respects what he has will always have more than a man who doesn't. She thought of her mother, too, Dolores, who had kept other people's homes clean for 20 years, and who once told a 9-year-old Diana, standing in a department store where a clerk had followed them down 3 aisles in a row, never let people make you rush while they are disrespecting you. When you rush, you tell them they are right about you. You stay slow. You stay yourself. So Diana, she did not rush. She zipped the briefcase. She squared the strap on her shoulder. She lifted her chin and walked out of the checkpoint at exactly the same pace she had walked in, which was the pace she always walked, which was her own. But something had shifted, not in her, in the morning itself. 3 men had now touched her dignity like it was something they had the right to move around, and each of them had treated the touch as nothing, a small, ordinary thing, and had moved on to the next passenger without a second thought. What none of them understood was that small decisions stacked one on top of another do not stay small. They accumulate, they reveal, and the thing they were revealing that morning had no idea it was being written down in the so careful and consequential way possible. Her phone buzzed as she cleared the last bin. A message from Aaron Mitchell, her chief legal officer, glowed on the screen. Geneva documents confirmed. Portfolio review begins today. Summit Air compliance files attached. Their customer treatment scores are worse than we expected, Diana. Much worse. Call me before you decide anything. Diana stopped near a window and looked out at the gray Chicago morning, at the planes crawling across the tarmac like silver shadows beneath a low and indifferent sky. She read the message twice. Then she looked back over her shoulder toward the checkpoint, where Dean Caller was already scanning the next passenger's pass with an easy green-lit smile. The whole interaction already gone from his morning, already nothing. She slid the phone into her coat pocket, and they took to the escalator and walked toward the escalator. She did not answer Aaron yet. She had learned something a long time ago, in rooms far more dangerous than this one. Power is most useful before people know you have it. So she said nothing, told no one, and carried her secret up toward the first-class lounge, where, as it turned out, the morning was not done with her yet. The Summit Air First Class Lounge sat above the terminal, behind frosted glass walls and soft lighting, and it had been designed from the ground up to make certain travelers feel insulated from the noise and the crowds and the ordinary friction of an airport morning. Leather chairs the color of aged whiskey, the smell of good espresso and warm pastry. Quiet voices, the gentle clink of a spoon against porcelain, the muted sound of fingers on keyboards. A room that whispered, "You belong here," to everyone it had already decided belonged. Diana approached the reception desk. The woman behind it wore a navy blazer with a small silver pin and a name tag that read Sandra Price. She had a smooth, practiced smile, the kind that arrived half a second before the eyes did, and left the same way. "Good morning," she said. "Boarding pass, please." Diana held out her phone. Sandra scanned it. The screen flashed red. Sandra's smile adjusted, but it did not fall. "I'm sorry," she said, in the tone of someone who was not particularly sorry. "This is showing that you do not have lounge access." Diana looked at the phone in Sandra's hand. "Check again, please." "I'm in first class. Seat 2A. Sandra tapped again. It is pulling up a main cabin profile. That is incorrect. I am only telling you what the system shows. Sandra glanced past Diana's shoulder at a man in a gray suit who had come to stand behind her briefcase in hand. She lowered her voice into something confidential and faintly weary, the tone of a person delivering disappointing news to a third party, while the actual audience stood do not sync correctly. Sometimes the app in our system do not sync correctly. It happens on international departures. Diana opened her confirmation email. She had learned to keep the receipt exactly 3 taps from her home screen because she had needed it in exactly these moments too many times. First class fare, lounge access included, meal preference confirmed, priority boarding confirmed. She turned the screen toward Sandra and held it there, steady and unmoving. Sandra looked at it. Then she looked past it, at the man in the gray suit at the door, at the middle distance, at anything that was not the documented proof being held in front of her. You may want to speak with guest services, she said. I am speaking with guest services, Diana said. The man in the suit behind Diana let out a small laugh in nose, through him so, not loud, just enough, a private little sound that said something without saying it. Sandra heard it. Diana heard it. Everyone within 10 feet heard it. And no one said a word about it, because that is how these things survive. Not through the most obvious insult, but through a roomful of people quietly agreeing to let the obvious thing go unnamed. Diana turned her head slowly toward the man. Sir, she said, her voice perfectly even. There are 2 other desks open. You are welcome to use one of them. The man's mouth opened and then shut. His eyes dropped to the floor. He stepped back. Sandra's fingers returned to the keyboard faster now. Let me try and override. The first attempt failed. Red. The second failed. Red again. A slow flush crept up the back of her neck. The man behind Diana shifted his weight and muttered something beneath his breath. Diana did not turn this time. She kept her eyes on Sandra. Take your time, she said. I have over an hour before my flight departs. The third attempt went green. The small gate beside the desk clicked open with a soft mechanical sound. There you are, Sandra said in a tone that implied she had just performed something generous. Enjoy the lounge. Diana waited 1 full second, then 2. She looked at Sandra, and Sandra looked back, and the apology that any decent person would have offered simply did not come. It was not going to come. So Diana stepped through the gate and into the room that had spent the last several minutes insisting she did not belong in it. Inside, a server crossed the floor and greeted a couple by name. Welcome back, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington. Lovely to see you again. He set fresh glasses at their elbows with the ease of someone doing something he genuinely enjoyed. Diana chose a chair near the window, away from the bar, and sat with her briefcase against her leg and both hands resting on her knees. Below her, through the glass, the terminal continued its indifferent motion. Luggage rolling. Families moving. Announcements cycling through their endless loop. Her phone buzzed. Aaron Mitchell again. Reminder. The Summit Air Portfolio Review is on today's agenda. Their service data keeps getting worse the deeper we look. Board wants your read before the Geneva call. This is a $600 million decision, Diana. Do not let them rush you. 600 million. Diana looked at the number. Then she looked up, across the quiet gleaming lounge, to the reception desk, where Sandra Price was now smiling warmly at the man in the gray suit, laughing softly at something he had said, waving him through without so much as a scan. Keslynch came in, the chairwoman of Meridian Stanton, the Summit Air Reading Global's board. We finished the Summit Air review this morning. Customer treatment numbers are the worst in the portfolio by a wide margin. I trust your judgment on this one, Diana, but we need a decision today. The Geneva team is standing by. Diana set the phone in her lap and let herself think for a moment. Outside, a plane pushed back from a gate with the slow grinding patience of something very large beginning to move. She watched it and she thought about what she had walked through that morning. The flicker in Kyle Weston's eyes when she approached his counter. The phone calls, the policy, the extra review that applied to her and to no one else. The way Simmons had reached into her briefcase without asking. B. The way Collar had stood there watching. The way Sandra had looked past the documentation in Dinah's hand as if proof were a suggestion rather than a fact. She almost let herself rest when it happened. B. Her boarding pass app refreshed on its own. B. The screen went white for a fraction of a second, and when it returned, the seat number had changed. Where 2A had been, it now read 32B. Diana went very still. The lounge kept breathing around her. A spoon chimed against a cup somewhere near the bar. Someone laughed at something. The soft announcement of another flight's boarding was piped in through invisible speakers. All the small, ordinary sounds that make an injustice feel colder, because the world does not pause for it, does not so much as slow down. She looked at the screen again. 32B main cabin. A middle seat, 3/4 of the way back to the aircraft. Then she opened the confirmation email, still on the phone. Seat 2A, first class. Paid and confirmed. The two screens sat side by side in her hands. The truth she had purchased and the lie someone had just written over it. She took a screenshot of both. She stood. She walked back to the reception desk. Sandra looked up and a practiced smile appeared right on schedule. Everything all right, ma'am? No, Diana said. My seat has been changed. Sandra glanced at the phone and something moved behind her eyes. Something careful and quickly contained. Oh, she said, it looks like there has been an operational adjustment. Diana repeated the phrase slowly. An operational adjustment. You moved me from a first-class seat I paid for to a middle seat at the back of the plane, while I was sitting 30 feet away in your lounge. Sandra pressed her lips together and clicked through her screen, her eyes moving in quick, tight paths. Whatever she saw there made her shoulders stiffen almost imperceptibly. I can see that a reassignment occurred, she said carefully, but I am unable to reverse it from here. You will need to speak with the gate team about this. The gate team sent me up here. I understand, but once a flight moves into final manifest control, lounge staff does not have access to seat assignments. Diana leaned forward. Not close enough to threaten, just close enough to be impossible to ignore. Who made the change? Sandra's finger stopped above the keyboard. I do not have access to that information. You have access to the fact that it was changed. You just told me you can see the reassignment. If you can see that it happened, you can see when, which means the record exists. Print it. I cannot do that. You can. You are choosing not to. Ma'am, I am not authorized to release that. And here Diana stopped because she saw, quite suddenly and with considerable clarity, what she was actually looking at. Sandra Price was not the origin of this. She had not reached into the reservation system and moved the seat. She was afraid of a supervisor, of a procedure, of getting her name associated with something that was already going wrong and accelerating. Her hands hovered above the keyboard as if the keys themselves might be used as evidence against her someday. Diana let her voice go quiet. Sandra, she said, reading the name off the pen with deliberate gentleness. I am not asking you to break a rule. I am asking you to write down what happened to a passenger who paid for her seat. That is not a rebellion. That is a receipt. For a moment, the mask did slip. Something real surfaced in Sandra's face, small but there. The recognition of a person who knew she was on the wrong side of something and had not yet figured out how to get to the other side. Her hand drifted toward the keyboard. And then a man's voice cut across the lounge from the entrance. Is there a problem here? He was mid-40s, pressed gray suits, an airline badge clipped high on his chest above a lanyard, and the unhurried stride of someone who had resolved 100 of these situations and expected the 101st to bend the same way. His name tag read Victor Graham. He crossed the floor without rushing, the unbothered confidence of a man arriving to manage something he had already decided was unmanageable. Sandra straightened immediately, the human moment folded away behind her uniform. Mr. Graham, this passenger says her seat was reassigned, and she has questions. My paid first-class seat, said, turning to face him, was moved to a middle seat in the back of the aircraft without my knowledge or consent. B. I want to know who authorized it and I want it restored. B. Victor glanced at Diana's phone with the mild, patient tolerance of someone doing this in his sleep. Seats are never guaranteed, he said. They are when they are purchased, confirmed, B, and tied to an international first-class fare. His smile thinned by a degree. Airline policy permits adjustments for operational needs. What operational need? He looked around the lounge, B, taking in the faces that had begun quietly turning toward them. Another passenger required accommodation, he said. B. The sentence sat there in the air between them, clean, official sounding, and entirely empty of actual meaning. Diana felt the familiar temperature of being handed a lie, polished smooth enough to pass for a policy. B. Another passenger, she said slowly, required my seat. Victor did not answer, but at that moment, through the frosted glass wall of the lounge, she saw a figure moving through the terminal below, crossing toward the gates. A man in a tan blazer, phone in one hand, B. A new boarding pass printed fresh in the other, walking with the easy, unhurried confidence of someone for whom every door in every building had always opened a moment before he reached it. Bradley Harmon, B. Sorry, she could not read the seat number on his pass from where she stood. She did not need to. Victor Graham followed her gaze. Then he stepped slightly closer and dropped his voice into something he intended to sound reasonable. B. Ma'am, I would suggest you accept the reassignment. B. We can offer you miles for the inconvenience. It is really the simplest way to move forward. No, Diana said. One word. Small, steady, and absolutely final. Victor blinked, B, as though the word had come from a direction he had not anticipated, from a person he had already classified as manageable. In the silence that followed, Diana picked up her briefcase, turned her back on the desk, B, and walked toward the escalator that would take her down to the gate, because that was, B, where this was heading. It had been heading there since Kyle Weston first looked up from his monitor and made a decision about who she was before she had said a word. Behind her, so quietly, she almost missed it, Sandra Price said, I am sorry. Diana paused for half a breath. She did not turn around, but the words reached her. A small apology from the wrong person, offered far too late to change anything. Still, it mattered. Inside a broken thing, some people still remembered how to be human. She had learned never to that when she found it. She kept walking. Gate K-12 had filled while she was upstairs. The rows of seats along the windows were nearly full now. Families spread across multiple chairs, a group of students with matching lanyards and comparing sleep times on their phones. A young couple asleep against each other under a single shared jacket. B. Two businessmen in nearly identical Navy suits talking with the contained urgency of people who had been talking all morning. The departures screen above the counter had flipped from on time to boarding soon, B, and the aircraft waited beyond the glass, white and silver under the flat gray sky. Ground crews in singed vests moving around it in the slow, deliberate choreography of an imminent departure. B. Diana found a space near the counter and stood, briefcase at her feet, and she watched. B. At the desk, Kyle Weston was back, and beside him was Alicia Torres with her fingers quick over the keyboard, and that same slightly hunted expression on her face, the look of someone new enough to still believe the rules meant what they said, and experienced enough on the job to have started noticing they often didn't. And near the priority lane, holding a fresh boarding pass, stood Bradley Tunstman. Diana watched Kyle greet him. The warmth, the ease, the immediate pivot toward helpfulness that had been entirely absent when Diana had stood at that same counter an hour before. She watched Kyle take Bradley's pass and scan it without ceremony. She watched Bradley glance down at the pass in his hand, and then just once, glance across the gate toward her, and then away quickly. The way people look past you when they know they are standing in something that used to belong to someone else. And would prefer not to carry the weight of knowing it. The gate agent at the microphone lifted the handset. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Summit Air Flight 512 with service to Geneva. We will begin our boarding process with our first-class passengers and members of our priority program. First class and priority members may board at this time. Bradley Harmon stepped up to the scanner. Kyle beeped the pass. B. Green, have a wonderful flight, Mr. Harmon. B. Seat 2A is just ahead on your left. He said the seat number without a flicker, without the smallest awareness that he was reading it off a reservation he had helped transfer away from a woman who was standing 12 feet away, watching him say it. Diana heard it. Seat 2TA. She waited while the priority lane thinned. She stood where she was, and she did not look at the clock, and she did not check her phone, and she did not give anyone in that gate area anything to work with. When the line had cleared enough, she walked to the counter and set her phone down on it. I am boarding, she said, and before you scan anything, I want you to understand that I have a screenshot of my reservation from 7:04 this morning, and a screenshot of what it shows now, and the exact time of the change in between. So let us skip the part where anyone pretends. Something complicated happened in Kyle Weston's face. Alicia Torres, beside him, went very still. Ma'am, Kyle said, you have been reassigned to 32B. He hesitated visibly. Then he reached for the phone and beeped it. The screen confirmed 32B. He set it back on the counter with the careful relief of someone finding solid ground. There we go. Boarding group 4. We will call you shortly. Diana looked at him for a long, quiet moment. Then she looked at Alicia, who was staring at her own screen with an expression that had gone tight and unhappy. The face of a person watching something wrong happen and calculating in real time the exact cost of saying so. That is fine, Diana said. I will board when you call me. But I want you to remember, Mr. Weston, that you had an opportunity this morning to simply do your job. To scan a boarding pass and say, enjoy your flight. That was all it would have taken. I want you to remember that you made a different choice. She stepped back. She found a section of open wall and leaned against it with her briefcase at her feet, and she felt something settle into her that she had not expected to feel. Not rage, not the hot, unsteady flush of being wronged. Something colder and steadier than that. The clarifying certainty of a woman who has decided exactly how far she is willing to be moved, and who has just watched the people around her walk right up to that line in complete ignorance of where it was. They called boarding group 4 sometime later. Diana walked down the jet bridge with her carry-on rolling smoothly behind her. The boarding pass in her hand read 32B. The decision in her chest read something else entirely. She had been told by a gate agent, a security officer, a TSA inspector, a lounge manager, and an airline supervisor that she did not belong in the seat she had paid for. She had been questioned and delayed and searched and redirected and denied and now reassigned. Each of them had made one small choice. Each of them had treated that choice as nothing, as policy, as procedure, just the way things work. What none of them understood was that this morning had not been 5 separate incidents. It had been one continuous thing, seen clearly by one pair of eyes, remembered precisely by one mind, and she was walking it down a jet bridge right now toward its conclusion. She stepped through the aircraft door and into the forward galley. The flight attendant checking passes at the cabin entrance looked up, and Diana recognized her in the same instant that the woman recognized Diana. Sandra Price, no longer behind a lounge desk. Now in the cabin doorway in her flight attendant's uniform, her practiced smile going completely still the moment Diana's face registered. For just a second, neither of them spoke. Then Sandra reset her expression into something professionally neutral and looked at the boarding pass. Diana did not look at her. She walked past, down the aisle toward row 2. Bradley Harmon was already settled in. He had his jacket hung neatly, his briefcase stowed, a glass of pre-departure champagne on the armrest tray. He had the expression of a man who had been upgraded so many times in his life that he had entirely stopped noticing it as a gift. Diana stopped beside him. She said it clearly, in a voice that carried just far enough into the forward rows. Excuse me, I believe you are sitting in my seat. Bradley looked up with the mildly unbothered expression of a man who had never once in his life been asked to justify where he sat. I'm sorry, seat 2A, Diana said. I paid for it 3 weeks ago. My reservation was changed this morning by hand and transferred to you. She held up her phone, both screenshots visible side by side. This was my seat at 7:04. This is your seat at 7:51. Same seat number, different names, 47 minutes apart. Bradley glanced at the phone. Then he looked away and gave a small, dismissive shake of his head. The particular shake of a man who has decided this is not his problem. I do not know anything about that. I checked in, they gave me a pass, and this is where the pass says I sit. If there is some kind of mix-up, that is an airline matter. It has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with you, Diana said, not sharply. Just true. You did not cause it, but you are comfortable keeping what came from it. Those are not the same thing, but they are closer than you would like. Sandra Price was already moving up the aisle, heels quick on the cabin floor, her voice carrying the sharpened edge of a person who has been caught off guard twice in one morning and is trying to regain the footing she had before. Ma'am, your seat is 32B. You need to move toward the back of the aircraft. You are blocking the aisle, and you are delaying boarding. I'm standing beside the seat I paid for, Diana said, and asking a straightforward question that no one has been willing to answer since I walked up to this gate. Who changed my reservation, and why? That is not something I can discuss on the aircraft, Sandra said. Then, call the gate. Sandra keyed her handset. A murmur had begun to spread through the first-class cabin. The woman in seat 1C had set her book down entirely. The businessman in seat 3C, who had been half listening at the gate counter an hour before, was now watching fully and without any pretense of not watching. And to Turak, a young man in a hooded sweatshirt, mid-20s, with a backpack under the seat in front of him, had quietly lifted his phone and angled it toward the aisle, his thumb resting on the record button, the way people of his generation do when they sense a moment worth preserving. Behind Sandra came a second flight attendant, younger, with dark hair and a name tag that read Jessica Park. She hung back half a step. Her eyes moved between Diana's face and Sandra's with visible unease. She had overheard the galley talk during boarding, a gate change, a passenger downgraded, an instruction from a supervisor that had not made any sense when she thought about it. She did not like what she was watching, but she said nothing. She only pressed her lips together and stayed one step behind her senior colleague. Hated the way you do when your conscience and your livelihood are moving in opposite directions and you have not yet made the decision about which one wins. The supervisor's on his way, Sandra said to Diana after a brief exchange on the handset. This is your last chance to take your assigned seat before this becomes a larger issue than it needs to be. It became a larger issue, Diana said, when reached into my larger issue and it doused me to the back of the aircraft so that a man who looks the way his airline expects a first-class passenger to look could have the front. I did not make this large. I simply refused to make it small. Victor Graham arrived through the aircraft door with the unhurried of a man who had walked into exactly this situation many times before and had never once left it without getting what he came for. He had clearly been told on the way what he was walking into, and he had clearly decided it would resolve the way these things always resolved for him. Miss Carter, he said, and Diana noted that he had learned her last name now from whatever screen they had been consulting since she walked down the jet bridge. It had taken a long confrontation and a seat change and a boarding hold for anyone to use it. We have been over this, Victor said. Your seat is 32B. I need you to take it, or I will have to remove you from this flight for failure to comply with crew instructions. You keep saying comply, Diana said. Comply with what? A seat change no one will explain. A downgrade with no operational reason that anyone will name. I have asked one question all morning. I have asked it politely. Every single person I have asked has answered it with a rule instead of a reason. So I will ask it one more time in front of all these people. And this time I would like an actual answer. B. She turned so that her voice reached the full forward cabin. Who moved my reservation from seat 2A to seat 32? B. And why? The question hung in the recycled air of the cabin. Victor Graham, a man who had spent the entire morning certain this was manageable, certain cabin would side by with the uniform the way cabins always do, certain this woman would have eventually run out of stillness and give him something he could work with. He made the mistake that would follow him for the rest of his professional life. He let it crack. He let the thing underneath the suit and the title and the practiced patience show. He leaned in slightly and dropped the reasonable supervisor's voice and said it loud enough for row 2 and row 3 and the young man's phone to catch every syllable. Because people like you always think the rules don't apply to them. You come in, dressed down. B. You make a scene. You dare us to say something. Well, I am saying something. This is a first-class cabin. You have a main cabin ticket. And I am done being lectured about it by a passenger who should be grateful. We did not cancel her booking outright. The cabin went silent, not the polite silence of people minding their own business. The other kind, B. The sharp, indrawn silence of a room that has just watched someone say the unacceptable thing out loud in a place where it was supposed to stay quiet. People like you. The young man in the hoodie exhaled behind his phone and said under his breath, "Oh, he did not just say that." The woman in seat 1C set her book down entirely. The businessman in seat 3C sat up straight in a way that had nothing to do with posture. B. Jessica Park, standing one step behind Sandra Price, closed her eyes for a single second as if something inside her had just shifted against her will. Diana did not raise her voice. She did all the raising for her. Victor said again. He lay gazing softly. Victor's jaw moved. He had heard his aim, she said, arrows hanging in the Risco cabin air, ugly and completely unretractable. Use, exactly. I misspoke, he said. He said, exactly. You have been careful all morning. Everyone has. System selection, operational adjustment, additional review. Very careful, very clean words, so no one would ever have to say the actual word. And then just now, when you thought you had won, when you thought I was about to give up and walk to the back and sit down and disappear, you said the real one out loud. People like me. She let that sit in the air for a moment. Thank you for that. B. You have no idea how much easier you just made the rest of my day. Victor's face flushed a deep, uneven red. He turned to Sandra. Get the gate agent and call security. She is refusing crew instructions and disrupting the flight. I want her off this aircraft. Jessica Park opened her mouth. Mr. Graham, she said. She's not actually done anything. She is just asking. Victor's voice cracked across the syllable. Herrera. Step back and do your job. B. Park, Diana corrected quietly, though it didn't matter. Hearing the wrong name used against the right instinct was its own signature. Jessica flinched and stepped back, and her eyes found Diana's for half a second. And everything she could not say lived in them. I am sorry. I am afraid. I know this is wrong. Diana gave her the smallest nod. Not forgiveness, exactly. Recognition. She had seen that exact look on 100 different faces in 100 different rooms. The look of a good person learning in real time what fear costs, what it buys, and what it leaves behind. Down the aisle came the sound of footsteps. 2 figures came through the aircraft door. One was broad-shouldered and shaved-headed, and Diana recognized him before his face fully came into view. Dean Kohler, the officer who had randomly selected her from the priority screening lane 3 hours ago. The other was the woman from the checkpoint, the one with the long face and quiet, watchful eyes, name tag Brent, who had stood a few feet away while Simmons worked the corner of Diana's folder loose and had done nothing and said nothing. She came in a half step behind Caller, her eyes sweeping the cabin, taking in the phones and the faces and the particular quality of the assailants before she made any decisions about where to stand. Collar's gaze landed on Diana, and something moved across his face. Recognition first, then a small cold satisfaction. The expression of a man who has already decided what someone is and has now been handed an opportunity to prove himself right about it. This the one, he asked Victor. That is the one, Victor said. Refusing crew instructions, B, disrupting boarding. I want her off. And Diana Ellison Carter stood beside the seat she had paid for in a silent cabin full of witnesses, B, and steady phone recording every second of it. And she understood that the morning had reached the exact edge she had felt coming since the first cold word at the gate counter. Kohler took one step toward her. Before I tell you what happened next, to ask you something. Imagine it is you. You're standing beside the seat you paid for 3 weeks ago. You've been questioned at the counter, searched at 3 weeks ago, by a woman, searched at the checkpoint, blocked at the lounge door, stripped of your seat while sat 30 feet away, and now in front of a full aircraft and 2 security officers, you are being asked to accept it, to go sit in the back and be quiet and let the morning file itself away as a misunderstanding. What would you have done? Tell me in the comments below. And if you feel what that cabin was feeling right now, that tight, tethered I cannot believe what I am watching feeling, do this story one thing before we go on. Hit the like button. Make sure you are subscribed. Because the next part of this morning is the reason I wanted to tell you this story in the first place, and I promise you, it does not end the way Dean Collar thought it would. Ma'am, Collar said, I am going to need you to gather your belongings and come with me. On what grounds? Diana asked. Failure to comply with crew instructions. I have a valid ticket to Geneva. I have not raised my voice at anyone. I have not touched anyone. I have asked one question that no one has answered. That is a customer with a question. You are refusing your assigned seat. I am standing beside the seat I purchased, Diana sighed, waiting for an explanation about why it was reassigned without my consent. If requesting a reason is now a security matter, then this airline has significantly larger problems than I do. Collar's patience, which had never been more than a thin surface over something harder, broke through. I'm not going to debate this with you. You can walk off this aircraft on your own, or I can walk you off. Your choice. But you are leaving. And Diana did the thing that would matter most 2 hours later, when the morning turned itself inside out in the middle of a crowded gate. She did not resist. She did not raise her voice. She did not give them the scene they needed, the angry, struggling passenger whose removal could later be explained as a secure matter, as a disruptive customer, as something that had nothing to do with anything but a woman who would not follow instructions. She looked Dean Collar in the eye and she said, clearly, slowly, in a voice the entire forward cabin could hear, I am not resisting. I will walk. I want every person on this aircraft to see that I am walking off on my own, that no one had to compel me, and that I still do not have an answer to my question. She reached down, lifted her briefcase, took the handle of her carry-on, and turned toward the aisle. That was when Eleanor Hayes stood up. The older woman had boarded early and taken a seat in the second row of the main cabin, just behind the first-class divider, and she had heard every word of everything that had happened since Diana walked through the door. Now she rose to her feet, silver hair tucked under a navy cap, reading glasses swinging on their chain, and she spoke in the clear-carrying voice of someone who had spent 30 years running a school and knew precisely how to make a room stop and listen. I have been sitting in this cabin the entire time, she said, and I want it on record that this woman has done absolutely nothing. Nothing. She asked a question. That is all. And instead of answering it, you searched her, you moved her seat, and now you are walking her off a plane she paid to be on. I have flown for 3 decades. I know the difference between a passenger causing trouble and a passenger being made into trouble. This is the second one, and every person on this aircraft knows it. A beat of stunned silence. Then the young man in the hoodie, phone still up, said, I have all of it. Every word. It is already uploading. 30. The businessman in seat 3C added, quietly but clearly, she is right. This woman has done nothing. This is disgraceful. A voice from across the aisle, low and shaken, said, I cannot believe I am watching this. Victor Graham's face darkened. This is an operational matter. It does not concern the rest of you. It concerns all of us, Eleanor Hayes said. The moment you decided, we would all watch it and say nothing. But Caller was already moving. He put one hand on Diana's upper arm, not gently, and steered toward the door. And Diana, true to her word, walked. She kept her chin level and her steps even, and she did not pull against his grip, and she did not give them a single frame of footage they could use to reframe what had happened here. She walked past Sandra Price, whose smooth lounge smile was gone entirely now, replaced by something pale and stricken, the face of a woman who had known 3 hours ago that something was wrong and had chosen not to say so, and was now watching the cost of that choice arrive in real time. She walked past Jessica Park, who had turned her face toward the galley wall with her hand pressed flat against it and her shoulders rigid, a person trying very hard to be somewhere she was not. She walked past Bradley Harmon in seat 2A, who looked down into his champagne glass and did not lift his eyes. Not once. At the aircraft door, Officer Brent stepped aside to let them pass. For just a moment, her gaze met Diana's, and Diana saw something in it that had not been there at the checkpoint that morning. The doubt was fully formed now, the discomfort of a person who has watched too much of this particular thing to keep telling themselves it is fine had reached the point where they walked telling was no longer working. They walked her up the jet bridge. Collar's hand on her arm, Brent a few steps behind, Victor Graham moving ahead, as if leading something that had already been won. Behind them, through the aircraft door, Diana could hear the cabin beginning to come alive, a low rising sound, not quiet anymore, the sound of a room that has watched something wrong happen and is deciding whether to stay quiet about it. They were not staying quiet. They came out into the terminal at gate K12, into the flat mid-morning light, and Dean Caller released Diana's arm with the small, decisive motion of a person setting something down that they are finished carrying. There, he said, you are off. You can rebook at the customer service counter or take it up with guest relations, but you are not getting back on that flight. Diana stood in the center of the gate area, briefcase in one hand, and Zahira's carry-on beside her. Coat slightly pulled out of place at the shoulder where his grip had been. Passengers waiting for other departures stared openly from their seats. A child near the window pointed. The departure screen of the counter still read Flight 512, Geneva boarding, the white text blinking with the cheerful indifference of a system that knew nothing about what had just happened beneath it. She had been questioned at the counter, searched at the checkpoint, blocked at the lounge door. Her seat had been taken from her while she sat 30 feet away, and now she had been physically walked off an aircraft in front of a full cabin, in front of a gate area full of strangers, in front of every person who had decided this morning this was the bottom. She could feel the floor of it, the place these mornings had always tried to put her. She reached up and, without hurrying, straightened her coat. She smoothed the collar. She adjusted the strap of her briefcase on her shoulder. And she stood in the terminal light and did not move, and did not speak, and did not break, because breaking was the one thing she was not going to give them. Her phone was in her coat pocket. She did not reach for it yet. She stood for a moment longer, just breathing, and she let the shame try to land on her knee, and she refused to let it find anywhere to sit, because Naomi Ellison Carter had been in this exact place before. Not this gate, not this city, not this year, but this feeling a very long time ago when she had had nothing. No title, no company, no portfolio, no team of lawyers on retainer, no chairwoman calling to say she trusted her judgment. Nothing except a folded suit jacket and a phone with 17% battery, and the particular clarity that only arrives when everything else has been stripped away. 22 years earlier, Diana Carter had been 24 years old, broke, and standing at a different counter in a different airport, in a different city, being had told for 4 months of the same thing. She economy classed the cheapest 4 months to buy the seat. Because she had wanted a seat, an assigned seat, because she had wanted a seat she knew would be hers. She was two years out of school, working 80-hour weeks at a mid-sized financial firm in Chicago, where she was the only black woman on her floor and the only person who was routinely asked to prove she was where she said she was. Her firm had a client conference in Denver that year. Attendance was not required but strongly encouraged, which in practice meant required for everyone except her, because the partner who organized it had somehow not included her on the invitation list and had somehow not noticed until she registered herself 2 weeks later. She wore her best suit to the airport, the one she had bought on a payment plan from a department store on Michigan Avenue. Not because it was extravagant, because her father's voice was always in her ear, and his voice said dignity should arrive before the body does. The gate agent at that counter in that other airport had looked at Diana's ticket and then at Diana and told her the flight was overbooked and she had been bumped. When Diana asked how a seat with a confirmed assignment could be bumped, the agent had shrugged and said the system chose randomly. Nothing personal. Diana had stood at that counter and watched. 3 men in golf shirts who had arrived at the gate after her were processed through, boarding passes in hand, without a single question. She was given a voucher and told she could try standby in the morning. She had missed out entire first day of the conference. She had sat that night in a plastic chair near the departure board and watched the flights she could not get on, pushed back from the gate, one after another in the dark. Her savings were gone. The voucher would not cover a hotel. She had folded her suit jacket into a rough pillow and slept in the chair with her carry-on between her feet and the terminal lights humming overhead. At some point around 3 a.m, she woke up and she was not crying, which surprised her. She was thinking very clearly, with the particular precision that comes when you have been pushed far enough down that the noise of everything else has finally gone quiet. She took out the small notebook she always carried, and she opened it, and by the light of her phone screen, she began to write. Not a complaint, not a letter, a plan. She wrote down every point at which that day had failed her. The agent, who had not seen her as a first-class problem to be solved, but as a third-class inconvenience to be managed. The gate attendant, who had let 3 other people through without the scrutiny she received. The system that called the outcome random and trusted that she would accept the word random the way people accept it when the alternative means admitting the coin is weighted. She wrote it all down, and then beside each point, she wrote what a company would look like if it had actually been built to do the opposite. A company that measured how the person who looked like they had the least was treated, not how person who looked like they had the most was treated. A company that put its resources into the parts of an industry that no one ever audited. The customer-facing parts, the human parts, the places where dignity was either protected or quietly stolen 100 times a day, and called policy. She worked until the terminal lights began to brighten and the first early morning flights began to announce their boarding. And by the time the standby call came for Denver, she had filled 11 pages. That notebook was still on her desk at home. She kept it in the top drawer next to the first incorporation paperwork from Meridian Global Partners. She had made herself a promise in that plastic chair in a way that had nothing to do with anger, because anger was easy and anger was a trap. Anger gave people the excuse to call you the problem. She made a promise that was harder and colder and more durable than anger. She promised herself that she would get so calm, so clear, so undeniably prepared that the next time a man behind a counter decided she did not belong, she would be holding the documentation that proved she owned the building. It had not made her small that night. It had made her build. And everything that had come in the 22 years since it had been on the foundation of those 11 pages in a plastic airport chair. The first client who trusted her with $2 million. The first deal she closed without a single person in the room who had expected her to be the one closing it. The first boardroom where she watched a man's face change in real time when he realized that the quiet woman he had been talking down to held the majority of the votes. She never gloated in those moments. She never raised her voice. She had learned that the people who mattered were never the ones who had underestimated her. They were the ones watching from the edges, the analysts and the assistants and the young women in the chairs near the window, learning in real time what the world thought they were worth. She was always building for those people, always. When a morning like this one arrived, those were the people she thought of. Standing now in the light of Gate K-12, 46 years old, coat straightened, chin level. Diana felt the old promise rise up in her chest like a tide coming back. The shame that had tried to land on her found no place to sit. She was not the woman in the plastic chair anymore. But she had not forgotten her. She never would. She took out her phone. 2 messages waited. The first from Aaron Mitchell. Geneva is asking why the Summit Air approval is on hold. Their executives have been in the conference room since 7. What is your read? The second from Carolyn Stanton. We have finished the full review. Their customer treatment numbers are the worst in the entire portfolio, and it is not close. I trust your judgment completely, Diana, but we need a decision by end of business today. Diana looked up from the phone, across the terminal to the gate counter, where Victor Graham was speaking urgently with Kyle Weston. Both of them glanced toward her and then quickly away again, and to Dean Collar standing a few feet off with his arms crossed and the settled expression of a man whose morning's work was finished and had gone the way he did. It was in fact only and now beginning. She lifted her phone and dialed Aaron. She said when he picked up, Aaron, she said when he picked up, I need you to open a documentation file. Timestamps, location, every name I give you. I will give you the details as I have them, but I want the file open right now, this moment. Do not do anything with it yet. Just open it and keep it ready. Aaron's voice was calm, unhurried, the voice of a man who had worked beside her for 15 years and had learned that when Diana's tone dropped to exactly this register, something very large was moving underneath it. Diana, he said, where are you? You should be in the air. I am at O'Hare, Gate K-12. I have just been escorted off Summit Air Flight 512 by airport security. A pause. Escorted off by security. After being searched without cause. Having my confidential documents nearly opened. Having my paid first-class seat manually transferred to another passenger while I sat in the lounge. And being told by the supervising airline representative that passengers, quote, like me, end quote, always think the rules do not apply to them. In front of a full aircraft and 2 security officers. The airline, Aaron said, and his voice had shifted. Still calm, but with an edge beneath it now. The Summit Air, the one whose $600 million investment is sitting on your desk. The same one, Diana said. Names. Gate agent Kyle Weston, airline supervisor Victor Graham, forward lounge attendant and lead flight attendant Sandra Price, security officer who removed me, Dean Collar, a second officer Brent, who I believe is now taking witness statements rather than participating, a junior flight attendant Jessica Park, a passenger Bradley Harmon, currently seated in the seat I paid for, and a witness Eleanor Hayes, who stood up on the aircraft and spoke on the record about what she observed. Do not contact the airline yet, Aaron said. I am fine, she said, and she was surprised to find, as she said it, that it was entirely true. Document everything. I will call you back. She ended the call and lowered the phone, and when she did, she realized she was no longer standing alone. Eleanor Hayes was walking across the gate area toward her, rolling back behind her, reading glasses swinging on their chain, with the expression of a person who has made a decision and is no longer uncertain about it. I told them I will not be on that aircraft, she said when she reached Diana. My granddaughter is getting married in Geneva on Saturday, and I would rather drive to another airport and start her over than sit in that cabin and pretend I did not watch what I watched. She extended her hand. Eleanor Hayes, 31 years as a public school principal, retired, and I will tell anyone who asks exactly what I witnessed today. Diana took her hand. Diana Carter, and thank you. You have no idea how uncommon that was, what you did in there. It should not be uncommon, Eleanor said. That is the whole problem, isn't it? We have all gotten so accustomed to sitting quietly while someone gets walked. Someone has to be willing to be inconvenient about it, or nothing ever changes. Across the gate, near the counter, Officer Lisa Brent had separated herself from caller B. She was standing apart from him now, her arms at her sides instead of crossed, her weight shifted differently. And when a passenger, the businessman from seat 3C, approached her and said that was wrong and you know it was wrong, Brent did not dismiss him. She looked at him. She said quietly, "What exactly did you witness?" And she took out a small notebook and began to write it down. Colin noticed. "Brent," he said, "what are you doing?" "My job," she said without looking up, "taking statements. That is standard procedure when there is a complaint. There is no complaint." She was removed for non-compliance. "Then it will all match up in the report," Brent said. And she kept writing. Diana watched this from across the gate and felt something she had not expected to feel. Not satisfaction. Something more complicated than that. The recognition that sometimes a room full of people who have been staying quiet begins, very slowly, to stop. The person Diana was watching most closely was none of the ones anyone would have expected her to watch. Not Kohler with his folded arms and his settled certainty. Not Victor Graham, who had retreated to a position near the gate counter and was speaking into his radio with the taut focus of someone managing the aftermath of something he had not expected to become an aftermath. Not even Bradley Harmon, who had at some point come off the aircraft, and was hovering at the far edge of the gate with his boarding pass in his hand and a look on his face that said he did not want to be recognized as part of this and was realizing it was too late. The person Diana was watching was Alicia Torres. The young gate agent had come out from behind the counter under the visible pretext of straightening the queue stanchions near the priority lane, But her actual path had brought her within a few feet of where Diana stood, and she hovered at the edge of the small cluster of people that had gathered, her hands laced together in front of her, her face doing something complicated. Diana recognized the thing happening in that face. She had seen it on Jessica Park on the aircraft, and she had felt a version of it herself once at 24, when doing the right thing had a price attached to it that she could not afford. Alicia had been at the counter when the reassignment happened. She had been right there sitting at her own screen when Kyle Weston received the instruction and entered the change. She had seen the seat number shift. She knew whose login had authorized it and whose name was attached to the approval. She knew, and the knowing was sitting on her like something heavy, and she was trying to figure out how to carry it. She had student loans she was still paying off 3 years after graduation. She had a lease in a neighborhood she had only been able to afford because 2 roommates split at the rent with her, and one of them was moving out at the end of the month. The coverage came through the airline. Coverage came through. This came through this job, this uniform, this counter. Doing the right thing had a cost attached to it. And fear, Diana knew, always sent the invoice before you had a chance to decide whether to accept the charges. Diana did not approach her. She had learned that you cannot push a frightened towards courage. You can only stand where they can find you if they choose to come. She waited, and after another few seconds, Alicia took a small step in her direction. "Ma'am," Alicia said very quietly, her eyes flicking back toward Kyle and Victor at the counter. "I am not supposed to be talking to you." "I know," Diana said. "You do not have to. You do not owe me anything." Alicia swallowed. "I saw it," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I saw him change your seat. Mr. Graham told him to. I was right there. There is a record of it. The system logs everything. Every change. Who made it? What time? Who approved it? All of it is in there." Her voice cracked slightly, But if they find out I said anything, if it comes out that I talked to you, I will lose my job. And my mother's insurance is on my job, and I have. She stopped. Her eyes were filling. Listen to me, Diana said, and she stepped slightly closer and lowered her voice, so it was only for the two of them. Pootie, you do not have to be brave for me. I am going to be fine. I promise you that whatever happens here today, I will come out of it fine. But here is what I know. Someday, maybe not today, there is going to be someone standing exactly where I am standing right now. Someone who does not have what I have, who cannot absorb this the way I can. Who needs one person behind that counter to do the right thing when it is hard and expensive and feels impossible. And when that day comes, I want you to be the person who does it. Not because you proved it today. You do not have to prove it today. But do not ever let them convince you that you are not that person. Because you are. I can see it in you right now. Alicia blinked. One tear ran down the side of her face. She pressed the back of her hand against it quickly, not wanting anyone to see. She looked back at the counter, at Victor Graham's gray suit and Kyle Weston's careful posture, at the whole apparatus of the things she was afraid of. Then she looked at Diana. The records are under a supervisor lock, she said. So quiet, Diana almost missed it. But the airline has a gate audit function. Full audit print. If someone with the right authority requests it, the system generates a complete log, original seat assignment, every manual change, the employee login on each action, the exact time, everything. She wiped the corner of her eye. Somebody just has to ask for it. Diana looked at her for a long, steady moment. Then she smiled. The first real smile of the entire morning. Thank you, Alicia. Go near the printer. Diana walked to the gate counter. Victor Graham and Kyle Weston both went quiet when they saw her coming. Dean Kohler drifted a few steps closer behind them without being asked. Officer Lisa Brent looked up from her notebook. Passengers nearby turned. I would like to request a full gate audit print of my reservation, Diana said. Original seat assignment, every change made to it, and the exact login on each change, and the exact time of each action. It is my understanding that the airline can generate this documentation at the gate upon request. Victor's expression closed like a shutter. That information is internal. It is my reservation. The audit trail is my history. The audit trail is airline data. I cannot release it. Diana looked at him for one moment. Then she turned, not to Kyle, not to Victor, but to Officer Lisa Brent. Officer Brent, she said, you are currently taking statements in connection with an incident that has been alleged to involve discriminatory treatment. Would a complete audit trail of the reservation changes be relevant to that report? Brent looked at Victor, then at Diana, then back at Victor. Slowly, she said, yes, it would be relevant. I would want it in the file. Then I'm requesting it, Diana said. And now a law enforcement officer is requesting it as part of an active investigation. Print it. Mr. Graham. Victor Graham stood frozen. She watched him run the math, the witnesses, the phones. The officer, with her notebook open, the widening crack in a story that had been airtight 2 hours ago when he had walked down the jet bridge to handle a manageable situation. He glanced at Kyle Weston. Kyle was looking at the floor. At the far end of the counter, Alicia Torres stepped up to the printer terminal. Her voice shook when she spoke, but it did not stop. I can generate it, she said. A gate audit on officer's request is within standard policy. She glanced at Victor. If you want me to stop, Mr. Graham, you need to tell me not to run a lawful audit in front of an officer. On the record, right now. Victor's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Alicia's fingers moved over the keyboard. Click, click, click. The printer behind the counter woke with a sharp mechanical sound, and the entire gate area seemed to tilt toward it. All of the noise and movement pausing for just a second, everyone oriented toward that one machine. A thin strip of paper began to feed out slowly, line by line, and Alicia tore it free with both hands. Her voice was trembling, but she read it clearly so that anyone within range of the counter could hear every word. Original assignment, Carter, Diana, seat 2A, first class, confirmed 21 days prior. She swallowed. Continued. Manual reassignment. Seat 32B, main cabin. Entered at 7:51 this morning. Employee login, B. K. Weston. Supervisor authorization, V. Graham. The gate went completely silent, not the ordinary silence of a brief pause, but the other kind, the heavier kind, B. The silence of a room full of people who have just watched the truth walk in, B. And take off its coat and sit down and not apologize for arriving. Eleanor Hayes shook her head slowly, the precise, deliberate movement of someone who has seen too much in their life to be easily surprised and is surprised anyway. Shame on you, she said, both of you. Kyle Weston's face had lost all its color. I was told to, he said to no one in particular, and everyone at once. Mr. Graham said to make room for a priority passenger. I just did what Weston, Victor said, his voice sharp. Too late. The words were already out. The record was already printed, and in the hand of a young woman who had been afraid of exactly this moment for the last 2 hours, and had done it anyway. Diana looked at the strip of paper in Alicia's hands. There it was, printed on the airline's own paper, generated by the airline's own system, with the airline's own employee logins, and the airline's own timestamps. She turned to Victor Graham. There is your operational need, she said quietly, right there, in your own handwriting, so to speak. You would a paying first-class passenger to the back of the aircraft by hand so that a man who looked the part could have her seat. And then, when she asked you why, you searched her and escorted her off the plane and called her people like you in front of a full cabin of witnesses. She looked at him evenly. Is there any part of that you would like to tell me is being taken out of context? Victor Graham said nothing, because there was no context. Then came the second tier of what was about to happen. A woman in a dark blazer was moving quickly up the concourse from the direction of the main terminal, B. Phone pressed to her ear, her face carrying the specific expression of someone whose boss had just told them to get somewhere immediately. Her airline badge read Patricia Monroe, Regional Operations Manager, B. She arrived breathless, scanning the gate, taking in the counter, the printer, the document in Alicia's hands, the faces, and then landing on Diana. Before it gets worse, Patricia said, and her voice was slightly unsteady. Miss Carter. Her eyes widened. She lowered the phone. I know who you are. Corporate Just. I am so sorry. I am deeply sorry for what she stopped. Took a breath. For what happened here this morning. Diana looked at her steadily. Are you sorry because you know what happened here today? Or because you just found out who it happened to? The question did what questions like that always do when they are asked in the right place at the right time. It educated the entire room. Every person standing within earshot absorbed it at once. Eleanor Hayes nodded once, slowly, with the grim satisfaction of a teacher whose point has just been made without her having to make it. And Patricia Monroe, to whatever credit she had remaining, did not reach for a comfortable answer. Both, she said quietly, and you are right. That matters. I am sorry because of who you are. I should not be. It should have mattered before I knew. That is the point. Diana thought it was the first honest thing anyone in a uniform had said to her all morning, and then she raised her voice just enough to reach the full gate. Because the second truth, Diana said, the one that has to be witnessed is the one that cannot be buried afterward. She looked around the gate at Victor Graham and Kyle Weston and Dean Kohler and Sandra Price, who had come back down from somewhere and was standing near the doorway to the jet bridge with her arms wrapped around herself, and at every passenger and bystander who had stopped to watch the morning unravel at gate K-12. My name is Diana Carter. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Meridian Global Partners. Meridian Global Partners has been conducting a comprehensive review for the past 14 months of a proposed $600 million investment in Summit Air, the largest single investment in this airline's restructuring plan. The final decision on that investment sits with one person. She let the pause hold for exactly long enough. It sits with me. It has always sat with me. And every single one of you spent this morning in extraordinary detail exactly what your airline believes a customer is worth. when that customer does not look like money. No one moved. Even the departure board above the counter seemed to glow harder in the silence. Dean Collar, who 2 hours ago had been so completely certain he was dealing with a manageable situation, he looked at Diana now with an expression she had seen many times and had long ago stopped finding satisfying. The sudden recalibrating respect of a man who has just understood that the person he was certain about was someone entirely different. She looked at it and felt nothing but tired. Respect that arrives only after the title is named is not respect. It is fear wearing a better suit. She had no use for it. She lifted her phone. Aaron, she said, and put the call on speaker so the gate could hear every word. I have the file, Aaron Mitchell said, his voice filling the space around the counter. Names, times, statements. I also have a photograph of the audit print, forwarded me 2 minutes ago. It is clean, Diana. The record is completely clean. Good, Diana said. She did not look away from Victor Graham's face. Then let us begin. The Geneva team has been holding, Aaron said. Summit Air's executives have been in the conference room since early this morning, waiting for the investment approval. Why you want me to tell them? Diana Carter stood in the middle of gate K-12 in her plain coat with her worn carry-on beside her. Surrounded by the people who had spent the morning deciding she was no one, and she said it clearly and without any particular drama, because it did not need drama, because the truth rarely does when it has finally been given a room large enough to stand in. Tell them the Summit Air investment is canceled, effective immediately. The word landed the way very quiet things land when the room is ready for them. Victor Graham closed his eyes. Patricia Monroe went completely still, the blood visibly leaving her face in a way that was almost clinical to watch. Kyle Weston made a small involuntary sound, barely audible, and Dean colored Diana from a green-lit selected and walked her off a plane with his hand on her arm, took a single step backward, as if physical distance could undo the last 3 hours. Diana, Aaron said carefully, because it was his job to be careful. 600 million. The board finished the review this morning, Diana said. Carolyn told me herself. Their customer treatment numbers are the worst in the entire portfolio. I was prepared to give them one more opportunity to demonstrate that those numbers were a tire, an anomaly, a bad quarter, a training gap, something addressable. She looked around the gate at all of them, unhurried and complete. Instead, they gave me a live demonstration. From the gate agent to the supervisor, to the flight attendant, to the security officer who put his hand on my arm. This is not one bad morning. This is what they are when they believe no one important is watching. And I am not going to put $600 million of other people's money behind a company that treats human beings this way and calls it operational policy. Understood, Aaron said, and she heard it in his voice. Not shock. The quieter, steadier sound of someone who has known her long enough to recognize when she has made a decision that is final. I will notify the Geneva team. I will notify Carolyn. The formal withdrawal goes out within the hour. Do it, she said. She ended the call. The silence at the gate stretched out and became something with weight in it. And then, because Diana had learned long ago that justice, which cannot be witnessed, is too easily rewritten into something manageable, she turned to Patricia Monroe, the only person present with actual institutional authority, and she began to make the consequences visible. Ms. Monroe, she said, you are the ranking Summit Air employee at this gate, so you are going to make some decisions right now, in front of these witnesses. Patricia straightened. Yes, ma'am. Officer Kohler placed his hands on a passenger who had committed no crime, on the verbal instruction of a supervisor who was at that moment concealing a falsified record. His conduct goes to Airport Security Administration and to the incident file Officer Brent is compiling. But this, she gestured to the counter, to Victor, to Kyle. This belongs to you. Patricia turned to Victor Graham. Her voice was unsteady, but it did not waver. Victor, you authorized a manual reassignment to remove a paying first-class passenger without cause or consent, B, and you instructed a junior employee to execute it. You then prevented documentation of the action and authorized the physical removal of the passenger when she requested an explanation. B. You are relieved of duty effective immediately, pending full investigation, badge, and access. Now, Victor's mouth opened. Patricia Vanessa said, "You can't just corporate is on the phone right now, confirming that I can." B, she said. "Badge now." His hand went, trembling, to the lanyard at his chest. He unclipped the badge. B. He set it on the counter. The man who had marched down the jet bridge 2 hours earlier with the certainty of someone heading a procession stood in the wreckage of it with nothing in his hands and no expression that fit what had happened. Patricia turned to Kyle Weston. "Kyle," she said, "you entered a falsified reassignment into the system on a supervisor's instruction. You will be removed from customer-facing duties pending review, B, and you will provide a complete written statement to the investigators. Everything, the full truth of every instruction you received." Kyle nodded rapidly. "I will. I'll tell them everything. It was Mr. Graham. He told me to do it. I did not want to, but he said the other passengers needed." Dinah said, "Not cruelly, just precisely on you did. Not cruel, Singh. Cyrus, true, and you did. Both of those things are true at the same time. B, the next time someone with a small amount of authority tells you to do something you know is wrong, I hope you remember exactly how this feels. Because this right here is the price of that choice. E, and the memory of this particular morning is something you will carry." Kyle said nothing. There was nothing useful he could say. Diana turned then to Alicia Torres, E, who was still standing near the printer with the audit strip in her hands, her face tear-stained, her posture a complicated mixture of fear and something else, something that had not been there an hour ago. "Ms. Monroe," Diana said, "this young woman ran a lawful gate audit when her direct supervisor attempted to prevent it. She is the only person behind that counter this morning who did her job with integrity. I want her statement formally protected in writing. And I want it noted personally by me that if any professional harm comes to her, because she told the truth today, Meridian Global's legal team will take a specific and sustained interest in understanding why. Is that clear?" Patricia Monroe looked at Elisa and something genuinely human came into her expression. "It is clear," she said. "Alicia, you are protected in writing. I will personally ensure that." Elisa pressed her lips together and looked down at the strip of paper still in her hand. She nodded once, and the tears that came were the quieter kind, the kind that come after a decision has been made and survived rather than before. Bradley Harmon, who had been standing at the edge of all of this with the mounting discomfort of a man whose pleasant morning has turned into something keeps not being over, caught Diana's eye. He held up in the apologetic gesture as someone who wants to explain something, sought to tie it before it gets used against them. "About my seat," he began. "You were favored," Diana said, "not promised. There is a difference. And I think if you sit with it honestly on the flight to Geneva, you already know what that difference looks like in practice." She said it without heat, without accusation, just as something true that he would have to carry. Bradley Harmon closed his mouth. He turned and walked back toward the jet bridge, alone, without anyone rushing to make him comfortable, a man who had gotten exactly what he wanted from the morning and was going to have an entirely miserable time with it. Officer Lisa Brent closed her notebook and walked to where Diana stood. "Miss Carter," she said, "my report will reflect that you complied fully throughout the removal, and that the removal was based on a falsified reservation record. I should have asked more questions this morning. At the checkpoint, I did not. I am sorry for that." Diana looked at her. The apology was real. She could hear that. "Then ask more next time," she said. "That is all any of us can do. Stop with the next person, and the one after changes. After that, that is how it honges." Brent nodded once. "I will." She stepped back. Patricia Monroe turned to Diana one last time. "Mrs. Carter," she said, "is there any possibility, any at all, that this decision could be reconsidered? The airline Needs this investment. There are 11,000 people who work for Summit Air, not the ones at this gate, the mechanics, the ground crews, the reservation staff, the people who had nothing to do with what happened this morning. If the partnership falls through, I am not making an excuse for what Tim here. I am not making an excuse. B. I am asking one person to another whether there is a door here that is not completely closed. It was a fair question. Diana had expected something defensive, something corporate, and what she had gotten instead was a person asking honestly for something they did not have a right to ask for. That took a different kind of courage. She respected it. The investment stays canceled, Diana said. I will not reward what I witnessed this morning by writing a check the same afternoon. That is not accountability. It is just money buying its way past consequence, and I have watched that happen to other people my entire life. Not today. Patricia's shoulders dropped, but Diana continued. There is a difference between a door that is closed and a door that is locked. If Summit Air wants to have a conversation 6 months, in a year the conversation begins with evidence. Not a training video, not a public statement with a stock photo of a diverse workforce. Real evidence, documented protection for employees who do what Alicia Torres did today. Real consequences for the supervisors who do what Victor Graham did, and a public accounting of what happened at this gate so that the 11,000 people you mentioned know what their company did and what their company chose to do about it. Show me that. Show me it in the data, in the numbers, in how the person who looks like they matter least gets treated when no one powerful is in the room. Give me that, and I will take a meeting. Patricia Monroe looked at her for a long moment. That is more than fair, she said at last. Thank you. And then, carefully, she added, I mean that. I know you do, Diana said. That is why I said it to you instead of to him. She did not look at Victor Graham, who was standing to the side with nothing in his hands and nowhere useful to go. She was done looking at him. The gate had begun quietly to transform. The flight to Geneva would depart without her, without Eleanor Hayes, and the two of them would find their own way to Europe on another carrier before the day was out. Diana had already sent Aaron the request to arrange it. Victor Graham had walked away from the counter with his badge in his palm and nothing else. Kyle Weston was on the phone with someone from HR, speaking in the careful, clipped tones of a person reciting facts they wish were different. Alicia Torres had sat down in a chair near the printer and was sticking this paper still in her hands as if it were something she had not expected to be holding when the morning started. She was still afraid. Diana could see that fear. Fear does not dissolve the moment you do the right thing. Sometimes it gets louder for a little while. But the strip of paper in her hands was real, and the protection promised to her was real, and the morning she had survived was real, and those things had weight. Dean Kohler had not spoken since the audit print. He was near the far end of the gate area, standing with the removed quality of a man who has realized, belatedly, that the situation he thought he was in control of had been something else entirely. Lisa Brent was near the counter, speaking quietly with Patricia Monroe, her notebook still open, pen still moving. The young man in the hoodie had made his way off the aircraft and was standing near one of the windows, his phone in his hand, talking to it the way people talk to their audiences, the way people of his age have learned to narrate live to strangers who are watching from somewhere else. And whatever he was saying, the number of people watching it had apparently grown considerably in the last half hour. Eleanor Hayes came and stood beside Diana. Just beside her, not speaking, the simple presence of a person who had decided she was going to stand in this spot for as long as it took, which was all she had been doing all morning, and which had been, in the end, the most powerful thing anyone had done. You never raised your voice, Eleanor said. Not once. In the entire morning. I was watching from the first moment I noticed something happening at the lounge desk, and I have been trying to understand how you did it. I have been trying to understand it since I stepped off that aircraft. Diana was quiet for a moment. I was trying very hard not to break, she said. It was the first entirely honest thing she had said to anyone all morning who was not Aaron Mitchell. The first crack in the composure she had been carrying like something load-bearing. Eleanor looked at her, not with pity, with the recognition of one person who has carried weight for a long time looking at another. Sometimes not breaking is its own kind of strength, she said. But I want you to hear what I saw, because I do not think you can see it from inside it. She paused. I saw a young woman at that printer stand up when she was terrified, because you gave her the permission to believe she could. I saw an officer start writing things down, because you created a situation where not writing things down became impossible to justify. You did not just stand up for yourself. You stood up in a way that made it easier for the next person to stand up too. And the person after that, she tilted her head slightly. That is the rarest thing there is. I have spent 30 years trying to teach it, and I'm not sure I ever taught it as clearly as you just lived it. Diana felt her throat tighten. Not at the words, though the words were real. At the thing underneath them, because Eleanor had named it, the one thing Diana had actually been trying to do, the thing she had been working towards since she was 24 years old, in a plastic airport chair with a dying phone and a notebook. Not revenge. She had never wanted revenge. Revenge was easy and revenge was satisfying for about 45 minutes, and then it left the room, exactly where it had been. What she had always wanted was something harder and slower and more durable than that. She wanted the frightened young woman to know she was capable of pressing the button. She wanted the officer who had looked the other way to start keeping a notebook. She wanted the room to be different the next time, and the time after that, not because one person had been humiliated or fired or shamed into a better behavior, but because someone who had been watching had decided something different was possible. She had promised herself that 22 years ago, in the dark of a terminal she could not leave. She thought she was still delivering on it. She picked up her briefcase. Eleanor picked up her rolling bag. They walked together through the gate area toward the main terminal, past the departure screen that still read Flight 5 Geneva boarding, past a row of seats, where passengers for other flights were watching them go with the particular expression of people who have seen something they are going to tell someone about later, past the small cluster of staff near the counter who did not quite know where to look. As they passed the printer station, Alicia Torres looked up. She and Diana held each other's gaze for a moment. Diana gave her a nod. Small. Alicia's terse together and certain. Alicia pressed her lips together and nodded back audibly, and in her face, Diana saw the earliest version of something she recognized. The look of a person who has discovered what they are capable of and does not yet know what to do with the information, but is beginning to understand that it is not going away. They flew to Geneva that evening on a different carrier. Diana had a window seat. Eleanor had the seat for the first hour. They did not talk about the morning for the first hour. They talked about Eleanor's granddaughter and the ceremony on Saturday, and whether the weather in Geneva was likely to cooperate. And somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, Eleanor made a dry observation about airline champagne that made Diana laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere unexpected, the kind you do not plan and cannot perform. And it was the best thing that had happened all day. The summit air withdrawal was transmitted formally that afternoon. The Geneva team received the notice at 2:47 in the afternoon, local time. The executives who had been waiting in the conference room since early morning gathered their materials and went home. Summit Air's share price did not do anything dramatic in the immediate term, but the document that Aaron Mitchell had begun building that morning at Gate K-12 was thorough and clean and complete. And within the week, it had been reviewed by people at 2 different regulatory agencies, who found it interesting enough to open inquiries of their own. The story of what had happened at Gate K-12 traveled faster than any of the aircraft at O'Hare that day. It went first where the young man's video went, which was everywhere at once, the way things go now, out to a few hundred people, and then a few thousand, and then a number that no one involved had any framework for. B. It went where Eleanor Hayes told it to anyone who asked her over the following weeks. B. Which was several journalists and one television producer, and eventually a congressional staff who was working on something that turned out to be important. B. It went where the truth goes when no polished language has been quick enough to get there first. 6 weeks after the morning at Gate K-12, a letter arrived at the offices of Meridian Global Partners in Chicago. B. It was from Alicia Torres. B. She was still employed. She had been given a formal written protection letter signed by Patricia Monroe personally, and she had been moved into a new role within the airline, helping to develop and deliver training for gate agents on service standards and passenger rights. She was 6 weeks into the new position, and she was beginning to feel something she had not expected to feel about it, which was that she might be genuinely good at it. They took B. I think about what you said to me at the gate, she wrote, about the person who would one day be standing where you were standing and would not be fine. I keep looking for them. I think about them when I'm in the training sessions and when I'm watching the new agents work and when I am at the counter myself. Last week, I caught one. B. A man who was being downgraded without proper cause. And he was the kind of person who was just going to accept it, just going to say, okay, and go to the back and not say anything because he did not believe it would make any difference if he did. I went into the system before he had to ask a single question, and I fixed it. He never knew there was a problem. He just got on the plane in the seat he had paid for, and the whole thing cost him nothing. He did not know my name. He did not know what I almost did not do, but I knew, and I thought of you the entire time. Diana read the letter twice. She folded it and put it in the top drawer of her desk, in the place where she kept the things she did not want to lose. B. The things she needed to be able to reach without looking in the dark at any hour. The old notebook was already there, the one with the 11 pages from the night in the plastic chair. The one had become everything, and she did not take another meeting with Summit Air. She did meant and she did not want to, and she had meant exactly what she said about the conditions under which a future conversation might be possible. B. Whether those conditions would ever be met was not something she spent time wondering about. She had spent enough of her life watching what happened when institutions faced the consequences of their own behavior. B. And she knew that the ones who changed were not the ones who had been embarrassed into it. They were the ones who had found somewhere inside the wreckage, B, a person like a Felicia Torres who understood that what you do when no one important is watching is exactly as important, B, as what you do when everyone is. She had not won that morning because she was powerful. She had won because the truth was, and her power had done nothing more or less than force a room full of people to finally look at it directly. The truth had been sitting there all morning, patient and unhurried and completely uninterested in whether anyone acknowledged it. It had just been waiting for someone to refuse to look away. B. Every person who walks through an airport door or a hotel lobby or any other threshold in the world deserves to be seen as a person before they are assessed as a category. Every human being deserves to be treated with dignity before anyone decides whether they belong. And the moment one person refuses to be walked quietly to the back, the moment one person says out loud that they have a question and they intend to wait for an answer, is the moment everything that had been settled and silent and decided becomes suddenly, inconveniently, exactly as unfinished as it actually is. If this story moved something in you, if you felt the weight gate and the importance of what happened there, do 3 things before you go. Give this video a like so more people can find it and be part of what it starts in them. Subscribe to this channel, so you never miss a story about the kind of courage that changes things without ever needing to raise its voice. And share this with one person who needs to be reminded today that calm can be stronger than shouting, that one person who refuses to be moved can turn an entire room, and that standing up for yourself with nothing but the truth and the patience to hold it steady is always, always worth being a little inconvenient for. So, and tell me in the comments 3 words, the 3 words that describe what Diana Carter did at Gate K-12 on that morning when everything they were certain about turned out to be wrong. 6 weeks after Gate K-12, Diana was at her desk in the Meridian Global offices on the 31st floor of a building on Michigan Avenue, reading a quarterly compliance report, when her assistant knocked twice and said she had a letter from an Alicia Torres, marked personal. Diana set the report aside and opened the envelope carefully. The handwriting was careful, slightly cramped at the left margin, the handwriting of someone who had composed the letter more than once before deciding to send it. The paper was plain, not letterhead. She read it twice. She set it on the desk. She looked out the window at the city. She not with Alicia about a conversation she had never finished. Not with Alicia, not with Eleanor, not with Aaron. A conversation she had started with herself in a plastic airport chair 22 years ago when she was 24 and broke, and the city she could not get to was somewhere above the clouds while she sat on the floor they had put her on. She had started a conversation that night about what it would take, what it would take, what it would actually take, not the surface things, not the titles and the approval dinners and the headlines, but the thing underneath all of that, the thing that mattered when none of the other things were there to protect you. When you were just a person in a coat with a carry-on with worn wheels, holding a ticket that a stranger had decided not to believe. She had written in that notebook that night that the measure of any institution, any company, any airline, any bank, any school, any system of any kind was not how it treated the person who came in looking like money. That test was too easy. The measure was how it treated the person who came in looking like they had nothing when no one important was watching, when there was no camera and no consequent evidence, and it was just the two of them, the person behind the counter and the person in front of it. And one of them had a small amount of power and could use it any way they chose. That was the test. And most institutions had been failing it for a very long time. She had built Meridian Global on the proposition that the data existed to prove this, that the patterns were there in the numbers. If you knew what to measure, that you could look at a company's customer treatment scores and see in them something real about the character of the institution, something that showed up not in their annual reports or their diversity statements, but in the moment by moment choices of the people they had trained and hired and promoted and put behind the counters and in the aisles and at the gates and in the lobbies. Summit Air's numbers had been among the worst she had ever seen in a major carrier. She had known that before she got on the plane that morning. She had been prepared to give them one more opportunity to demonstrate that the numbers were misleading, that the data was an artifact of reporting rather than reality, that the people behind the counters were better than what the metrics suggested. They had given her a demonstration instead, a live, documented, witnessed, filmed demonstration. And in some ways, she was still not certain whether to be grateful for that or not, because what she had gained in evidence, she had paid for in a currency that could not be refunded or deposited anywhere useful. She had paid for it in the particular exhaustion of a person who has had to be impeccable in a room full of people who were not holding themselves to anything. She had paid for it in the tightness she had felt in her chest in the lounge when the seat number changed, and she had breathed very carefully for a few seconds before she trusted herself to stand up and walk to the counter. She had paid for it in the moment at the terminal after caller released her arm, when she had needed to completely still and refuse the shame while the world moved around her and a child pointed and the departure board kept blinking and the world did not pause for even 1 second to acknowledge what had just been done to her. She had paid for it in ways she would probably still be discovering months from now, in small, unexpected moments, in airports and lobbies and boardrooms, when her body remembered something her mind had already filed away. That was the actual cost, not the $600 million, which was a number and a decision and something that had gone the way it needed to go. The actual cost was what it cost to be the person who had to remain impeccable in order to be believed. While the people doing the things she was being accused of causing did not have to be impeccable at all. She had known that cost going in. She had known it since she was 24. She had never made her peace with it because there was no peace to be made with something that should not exist in the first place. She had simply learned to carry it without letting it weigh down the people she was building things for. The letter from Alicia Torres sat on the desk. Diana read it one more time. The man who had not known there was a problem. The seat restored before the questions had to be asked. The name she would never know. She thought about that for a while. The name she would never know. She thought about all she would never owe. The passengers who had been quietly moved and catly aided had gotten off, accepted it, and kissed the plane and gone home and told maybe one person about it if they told anyone at all. The ones who had been searched and had let the folder be opened and had stood there in the enhanced screening line and watched the ordinary to anyone about flow past them because they had learned they weren't the way they Diana had once almost was learned that saying something rarely led anywhere useful. The ones who had eaten the miles and taken the mid seat in the back and told themselves it was just one morning, just one flight, just one small thing. Not worth the energy, not worth the attention, not worth the cost. She thought about what it had taken for one person in one morning to refuse to be managed and what had happened because of it and how different it would have been if she had let Kyle Weston file her away and walked onto the plane and sat in 32B and said nothing. She opened the top drawer of her desk and placed the letter from Alicia next to the old notebook. The drawer closed with the soft, final sound of a thing being kept. Outside, Chicago moved through its afternoon. Cars and people in the elevated train and a sky that had been gray that morning and had cleared by now to something pale and tentative but present. The kind of sky that is distorted to be there after all. She sat with her hands flat on the desk and let herself be quiet for a minute, because the kind of work she did, the real kind, the kind that had started in a plastic airport chair with 11 pages of notes, did not have an endpoint you could see from where you were standing. It had moments, days, decisions, letters from young women at printers, men on planes who never knew their seat had been saved for them before they had to ask. She would take another flight tomorrow. She would be in another airport by the end of the week. She would stand in another line or sit in another lounge or wait at another gate. And somewhere in that airport, there would be a Kyle Weston and a Victor Graham and a Dean Kohler and a Sandra Price. And there would also be an Alicia Torres, afraid behind a keyboard, watching something wrong happen and trying to decide. She hoped when that day came for the next Alicia and for the one after and for all of them that something had shifted a small but measurable amount in the world they were deciding inside. She hoped that was what she had actually done. Not canceled a deal, though she had. Not got a supervisor fired, though she had. Not generated documentation that had become relevant to two separate regulatory inquiries, though it had. Those things were real. They had weight and consequence. But the thing she hoped for, the thing she had been working towards since 24, was this. She hoped that the next Alicia would press the button a little faster, a little more certain, a little less afraid of what it cost. Because someone, somewhere, in some airport, had stood beside a seat they had paid for, and refused to move until someone gave them a real answer. And the whole room had seen what happened when someone did that. And the next person who almost did it and then thought better of it might think of it a second time. That was enough. Not everything. Not everything she wanted. but enough to keep building. She turned back to the quarterly report on her desk, and she kept working. If this story found you today, if it moved something in you that needed to be moved, please take 30 seconds to do three things. Give this video a like so that this story can reach the next person who needs it. Subscribe to this channel, because that the stories we tell here are about the people who change things, not with power, but with patience and truth, and refusals to be made small. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that dignity is not something you have to earn from a stranger behind a counter. It is something you bring through the door with you. It was always yours. And the moment you stop walking to the back quietly is the moment the room starts to understand that. Leave me a comment below with the 3 words you would describe Diana Carter. I read in every single one. I will see you in the next story.